Okay, so here we go with part 4 of my breakdown of the derivative use interview. I know we're making slow progress, but honestly, on the surface, you could be mistaken for thinking that there is very little of worth in this interview. But when you really start to pull it apart and look at it with the added perspective of the other interviews from Jen, the other interviews from Stefan, the jail calls, all that sort of thing, you do start to see some important things here. To me, it certainly appears that there are numerous occasions in this interview when Jen has lied or when she has been a little bit creative with the truth. So I know yesterday when I got to the end of part 3, I had this moment where I thought, oh wow, you're just talking too much, you're not getting anywhere with these interviews. But then, having read your comments and having thought about it for myself, I thought actually no, it's just that there is so much here that we really need to look closely at. So, ahead of time, I'm not going to apologise if this is another long video and if I still don't get through the interview in this video. Based on my past history, we could be here tomorrow for another one. So, yesterday's video, I finished off basically where we were looking at the sleeping arrangements in the townhouse. One of the things I had commented on was the difference in basically what Natalie was being charged for rent as opposed to what Angelica was being charged for rent. But someone pointed out to me that Natalie actually has had the upstairs master bedroom. She had an ensuite bathroom. So that would have been the reason why she was paying more in rent than Angelica. Which, totally, I hadn't even thought about that. Obviously, Angelica still had her own bathroom because she had requested that Stefan not use it. But it wasn't an ensuite. She still had to go out of her room into the hallway and into that bathroom. So now I can see why she was paying more. Now, before I launch back into the interview, I'm just going to say this at the start of my video. Welcome to my new subscribers. And of course, along with that, if you've not yet subscribed to my channel, it's free for you and it helps my channel immensely. So please hit that subscribe button. You can go into the notifications and choose to be notified when my new videos come out. And it certainly is one of the best ways that you can support my channel. So with that said, let's jump back into this interview.
So now you've broken up with Stefan in December of 2022, right? He's still paying rent, and he's there full-time in bedroom number 4. Is that where he goes after you break up?
No, he stayed in my room for a few months. We had broken up, but we weren't sure how to discuss it with Maddie because it was the middle of the school year, and I didn't want to affect her in any way. So we just played it off, acted like everything was normal and fine for the first 6 months. And then eventually she caught on, and then once she did, we admitted to her that we were broken up. And then, at that point is when he moved up to bedroom 4.
Okay, where do you start with this one? Again, what she's saying doesn't exactly make sense. The first thing she says is that basically this was the middle of the school year, apparently, when her and Stefan broke up. And they didn't want to affect Maddie's schooling. Do you see where the problem with that is? Jen had been pretty much completely disinterested in Maddie's schooling. She had been contacted about Maddie falling asleep in class, essentially, and just brushed it off with, "Oh, you've seen the real Maddie now." She had been contacted about Maddie's mental, emotional issues, and essentially told the counsellor, "Yeah, Maddie and I are having counselling." As far as we know, they weren't. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But again, she never took the time to go into Maddie's school to discuss any of the issues that were going on with Maddie. Maddie was failing. Maddie was not handing in assignments. Was Jen supporting her in any way with that? No, she wasn't. Jen knew that Maddie was failing and not handing in assignments. But she never did anything about it. And she was never active in terms of speaking to staff. She never attended any meet and greet sessions. She never once lifted a finger to try and actually do anything that would have allowed Maddie to achieve success. She just really didn't give a rat's ass. And now she's claiming that when her and Stefan broke up, they didn't tell Maddie because they didn't want it to affect her schooling. Well, I can't say that word, but I call BS on that. Just that one part. Let's move on. What the heck does she mean by "we played it off"? I don't understand what she's referring to here. We played it off and acted like everything was normal and fine. Okay, so this is wading into an area that I like to avoid, but it's got to be said. Jen specifically said to detectives that basically she hadn't had, let's say, relationships with Stern since they broke up. She's saying here, we just played it off. What, you pretended that you were having relationships? Or you gave excuses as to why that wasn't occurring? Because here's where it becomes disturbing. They were sharing a bed with Maddie. So, straight up, any change in the way that Jen and Stefan interacted with each other in that bed would have been obvious. I mean, I hate even thinking about that, but she claims that Maddie was in the bed with them all the time. She claims that they were having relationships up until the point when they split up, which means that she's essentially admitting that they were having relationships in that bed with Maddie present. I just can't see any other explanation for that. And now she's claiming we just played it off, acted like everything was normal and fine. I don't know, I don't understand what she thinks that actually looked like. What she means when she says, we just played it off. Now, she says, oh, eventually Maddie caught on. But are you serious? They lived in closed quarters. Maddie would have realised from day one that things had changed. And the thing is, until they actually came out and addressed the situation, then there's a good chance that Maddie was just feeling uncertain and confused and not really understanding what was going on in that 6-month period of time. Or maybe she understood what was going on. And here's a scary thought. Maybe she blamed herself because of her own, let's say, relationship with Stefan. Of course, Maddie knew that they were broken up from the beginning. She wasn't a vegetable. She was an intelligent young girl. So them actually just playing it off would have just created more uncertainty and more instability in Maddie's life. I mean, it took for Maddie to actually have to say to them, have you broken up? For them to finally address it. 6 months. Because she says here that once it was out in the open, Stefan moved upstairs. Well, she's admitted that they played the game for 6 months. It was never about worrying about Maddie. There was another motivation there. Another selfish motivation. Maybe it was because they didn't want Maddie to mention it to Yolanda. Because we know that Yolanda didn't like Stearns. And maybe the concern there was that once Yolanda found out, the pressure would be on for Stefan to move out. He's no longer your partner, Jen. You don't need him in the townhouse. Or maybe it was the financial incentives. We can get away with this without Stefan having to pay rent if we don't tell Maddie, because otherwise Maddie might tell Juan. Or Maddie might tell Yolanda, and Yolanda might tell Juan. Because I gather that Yolanda is a very business-minded person. Clearly, the relationship between her and Juan isn't too acrimonious, because we hear the account of her saying that Maddie was crying on the Saturday and didn't want to go home, so she arranged for Juan to take Maddie. So clearly there is communication between them, and there is adult communication between them. So is this why nothing was said? Because they were afraid that Juan would want to charge Stefan rent. But I think definitely either she's really that stupid and thinks that her child wouldn't notice these things, or she's lying, or she was deliberately choosing not to make it apparent to Maddie simply because she didn't want her family to find out, or for some other reason.
Okay. And once he moved up to bedroom 4, were there instances where Madeline would sleep alone upstairs with him?
I'm gonna say
I want you to think carefully before you answer, because obviously we've gone through your phone and we've seen all the conversations that you've had with Stefan. So it's clear that that's occurring, so I'm giving you the chance to answer the question.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how many times it's happened.
Okay.
Seriously, what was going on in this woman's head at this point in time? He's asked her if there were instances when Maddie would sleep alone upstairs with Stefan. And you get this long pause, you get the Soto sigh, and then you get a pause again. And then she comes out with the usual, I'm gonna say, get another pause and another sigh. She doesn't want to answer this question, and she's trying to think of the best way to answer it that's going to be the least incriminating answer for her. And this is when he cuts her off and says, think carefully. Obviously, we've gone through your phone. We saw the conversations you've had with Stefan, so it's clear that's occurring. The way he's saying that says to me that there's more than one conversation regarding Maddie sleeping upstairs with Stefan. So he's not just referring to the night when everything happened. He's referring to other instances. And he is signalling that to her. Now she's been caught out. She realises that she's been evasive. She realises she has to give an answer here. But she's going to stall for more time. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how many times that happened. You're kidding me, right? I think the truthful answer there is I'm now trying to figure out how many times it's been referred to on my phone so that what would be the best answer I can give you that makes me not look too bad. I mean, at the end of the day, this is not a new question for Jen. She's been asked it in pretty much every interview that she did and given different answers each time. So we know here that the motivation is not that she's got no idea. The motivation is that she is trying to figure out the best answer to use that is basically admitting, yeah, this has occurred, while at the same time trying to minimise it as much as possible. Because at the end of the day, this comes back on her. Of course, the irony is, by stalling and trying to lie about it, she could have had immunity had she been honest. But she chose not to do that. Meaning that in terms of her sending Maddie upstairs to sleep with Stefan and the number of occurrences, well, she shot herself in the foot, basically. I should probably also mention here that even had she admitted the number of times, she only had a certain amount of immunity from that admission because they had independently verified the information, both from interviews with Stefan and also from the data that they extracted from her phone. So the only gain she could have here in terms of immunity would have been by being honest and giving the exact number. I mean, she's in a position here where if she downplays it and basically says less times than they can prove, she's cooked.
Why are you allowing that to occur?
I saw Stefan as someone that I completely trusted with my life, my child's life. I thought he had cared for her as a father would. He had been in her life for more than half of it, playing the father role. I thought he cared for her the way I did.
What a complete, utter crock. Now, the first thing that I'm going to point out here is she was trying to be overly convincing here. She was over-explaining, offering excessive amounts of attempts at persuasion. If all this was true, it would have been more than adequate to say, I trusted him because there was nothing that I saw wrong in the relationship. Or even just because I trusted him. But she has to justify her answer with giving this long speech. And honestly, is it really believable? I saw Stefan as someone that I completely trusted with my life and my child's life. Let's talk about that instance, Jen. At least one of when he over-medicated your child. Let's talk about the multiple instances in previous interviews where you actually expressed your lack of trust for Stefan. Your lack of trust for male partners. My mother taught me not to trust the man. I know I'm paraphrasing there, but the way she said it is so dumb that I don't see the need to repeat it in her words. But what you're getting here too is a complete lack of fluency in what she's saying. At the very beginning, you get a pause and then you get the Soto sigh. And right through, you keep getting these pauses. So she says she trusted he's someone that, she trusted with her life, her child's life. And then we get the and the pause. Clearly, that wasn't enough persuasion in her eyes. She wanted to double down. And it made me sick to hear her say that he cared for her as a father would. You're kidding me, as a father would. No way. Jen could not seriously believe that. And of course she's got to double down on that. Because he's been in her life for more than half, playing a father role. Well, you know what? That's not the role that my father played in my life. And she's still not done. You get this pause again, and another another pause. I thought he cared for her the way I did. I don't believe any of this from Jen. We've heard enough from her other interviews to know that that's not what she believes. She's giving excuses here. She is trying to be overly persuasive. And she's completely contradicting her previous answers. And of course, having just given this long spiel of why she apparently trusts Stefan, you get this long pause, and she starts with I, and you get another long pause. She can't quite figure out what else to add here. And of course, at this point in time, Will J has had enough. Let's move on to another question.
Now, does there come a point in time in 2023 where you've kind of had enough of roommate, ex-boyfriend Stefan and ask him to hit the road?
Yes.
And is that fair to say it was like October?
Maybe, yeah, like the end of October, because then I gave him all of November and told him he had to be out by December 1st kind of thing. But yeah, that sounds about right.
And then did you kind of ask him to leave a month earlier and it was a source of arguments?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is clearly information that's been gotten off Jen's phone, which begs the question, how much information have they got off Jen's phone? What are they sitting on? Because we've seen very, very little with regards to Jen's phone, Jen's movement, anything that relates directly to Jen that isn't going to be evidence in Stearns's case. Although this will be evidence clearly. So he's talking about Jen basically reaching a point of asking Stefan to move out. And what we're finding out here is that she actually asked him at the end of October and gave him a month to leave. He was meant to be gone by the 1st of December. But what's interesting also is they say to her, and you asked him to leave a month earlier and that was the source of arguments. Meaning that it sounds like Jen had asked him to basically leave immediately at the end of October, and he arced up over it. We know that in terms of rent payments, we heard Chris talk about how in terms of when Stefan moved out, he basically made sure that Stefan moved out at that point in time because he didn't want to have to pay another month's rent to Juan. But it appears to me that Chris clearly wasn't told of the request to leave at the end of October, because that basically means he's paid an extra month's rent that he could have avoided paying. Although, maybe by that point in time he'd paid rent and Stefan was going, well, my rent is paid for the next month, so I'm not leaving. Because at the end of the day, Stefan's obsession with Maddie was something, it was a bit like a drug. So to be suddenly told, you have to leave and you can't have this anymore, I could imagine that he would fight back. I would love to know what these arguments were that occurred. What was it that Stefan said when he pushed back about having to move out a month earlier? And why was Jen so adamant about having him move out a month earlier? Is it just because she was angry at him over something? Or is there more to it? And why do we get this other version from Chris where he makes it sound like it was his decision for Stefan to move out? He wanted Stefan to quit his job because it was going nowhere, and he wanted Stefan to move down with them so that he could get a job at, I think he was Walmart or somewhere like that, and he didn't want to be paying rent anymore for Stefan basically living up there with a dead-end job. When it comes down to who to believe between Chris and Jen, that's a tricky one. Normally I would say, yep, I would believe Chris over Jen, but at the same time, we know, we've seen instances when Chris himself has been less than truthful. I think in this situation, I ask myself, who's got what to gain from telling lies here? Well, Chris hasn't got a lot to gain here, has he? In terms of saying we wanted him to move back down because he's in a dead-end job. What does that gain for him? I can't see any benefits. Whereas Jen, the insisting he be out a month earlier, as in out at the end of October, and then giving him an extra month. I think if we look at the two stories together, perhaps what the issue is here, that maybe Chris has put his foot down and said Stefan's moving home. Jen's gotten upset over the fact that Stefan's going to move out and basically said, well, if that's the way you feel, go now. You're not welcome here anymore if you're going to abandon us. Because don't forget, she also said in interviews that they were trying to save up to bring him back home again. And that they missed him and they wanted him to move back. And they were waiting for him to be able to get his job back at Disney. So it is possible that what Chris is saying is truthful, and that having been told by Stefan that he was moving back to Northport, she spat the dummy and went, if you're going, fine, go now. I mean, she claims, I let Stefan do what he likes. But you can tell from the way she talks that she's the one who has to be in control in the relationship. So I would imagine Stefan saying, my dad wants me to move back home. There's no control in that situation for Jen whatsoever. And of course, she considers herself to be far superior to Stefan. That comes out so much in things she says. So if she sees herself that way, then in her mind she needs to control the situation. How do you do that? You need to control when he's going to move out. So turning around and saying, right, well, you can move out right now. This is just me hypothesising, but it's based on what we know of their relationship, what Jen has said in the past, and what Chris has said in the past.
So now at this point in time when he's being asked to leave, have you had any conversation with Maddie that mommy isn't together with Stefan anymore and this is kind of the ways of the world? Do you have that conversation with her?
She had, by June, she figured it out already, so she knew we weren't together or anything like that. So she, by December, she had already known he was leaving, but that was okay.
Of course it was okay. Maddie was probably looking forward to life without Stefan around, to be able to have a decent night's sleep without things happening. So it must have been crushing to her for him to start coming back to the townhouse. And it makes me so wild that basically they had him out of their lives. But Jen just couldn't let it be. I mean, she's the adult in that house. So essentially it's on her for allowing Stefan to come back into that house, and for allowing Stefan to once again have access to Maddie. I know a lot of people have all these wild theories about why Maddie was so upset on the Saturday and how, things to do with Stearns, yada yada. But at the end of the day, to me, it's as simple as this. She knew that he was coming for a visit, and she knew what that meant for her in terms of having to go upstairs with him. And she was upset because she thought all that was over. Imagine being in that situation where you've had 7 years of living in a state of fight or flight, waiting for that next bit of trauma to occur, and then finally that person is removed from your life and you can breathe again, or you think you can, until you discover that it's becoming a regular thing, that they are still returning and things are still happening. Maddie must have played that in her mind so many times that weekend, knowing that Stefan was going to be there and knowing that he was going to do the things that he normally does.
Why is he coming back to visit after he's out?
We're still friendly with each other at this point. Christmas is coming up, and we wanted to spend Christmas together. So he comes up for a few days during Christmas, and then he does visit a few more times after that, but for the day, and it's to pick up packages. He keeps getting mail delivered to my house, packages, so he just comes up and picks them up.
So what was the need for the Soto Sai after she's just been asked why did he continue to come and visit after he moved out? Why is that a cause of anxiety for her? Now she brings up we wanted to spend Christmas together, and he stayed a few days over Christmas, and then claims that basically every other time since then he's only come up just for the day to collect parcels. I'd be really interested to know if Chris can confirm that story, if that's his observation of Stefan's movements, or if this is another one of the big lies from Jen. And she's claiming here that he was just coming up to collect parcels. I've got so many questions. First of all, why would you allow someone who doesn't live with you to continue having parcels sent to your house? I'm sorry, but it's really odd. Were they all Amazon parcels? Was she able to confirm the contents of those parcels? Because it seems like a huge risk to be allowing parcels to be delivered to your house for someone who lives 3 hours away. Because essentially, whatever is in those parcels, if there is anything illegal in those parcels, you're the one that's going to go down for it. Because the first question that's going to be asked, even if you turn around and say, they're not my parcels, the first question that's going to be asked is, can you please explain then why this guy has moved out and you are still allowing him to have things mailed to your address? And it's going to be pretty hard to come up with a reasonable answer for that. Because I don't believe there is a reasonable answer. I mean, at the very least, she was enabling dishonest behaviour from him. We heard comments from Chris, I think it was, that Stefan kept having all these parcels arrive at their place. So it seems pretty clear that Stefan was trying to hide the fact, at the very least from his parents, that he was spending a lot of money online. Or at least he was trying to give the impression that he wasn't spending nearly as much money as what he was. And of course then the question is, who paid for the fuel for him to go up there for the day to pick up these parcels? And what's really confusing is that in this interview, in one of the interviews that Chris did, he claimed that when Stefan moved back home again, he had Stefan's car towed down to Northport because he didn't believe that it was in good enough mechanical order to make the drive home. So that is beginning of December, Stefan's car was towed back to Northport because supposedly it wasn't mechanically sound for those longer trips. We're being told of multiple trips from Northport back up to Kissimmee by Stefan, and yet we've been told that he only ever drove the Lincoln once. See the problem here? Did he still just drive his car up and back all those times after he moved back down to Northport? Did Chris allow it, or did he just not tell Chris that's what he was doing? And why this time, if that is the case, why this time did he then turn around and decide to bring the Lincoln? Is it because he lied to Chris about where he was going those other times? These day trips, said he was going to Frank's? Because I think that's something that Jen mentions in another interview. But how do you explain him going there for Christmas time? Deb and Chris knew that happened. They mentioned that in an interview. And exactly how does that fit in terms of Chris saying the Honda wasn't mechanically sound? If Chris had insisted that Stefan take that Honda back home on a tow truck when he moved back home, and then we have at the same time that trip on that weekend was the first time Stefan took the Lincoln to Kissimmee, it doesn't add up at all. We've heard from Chris, we've heard from the jail calls and stuff, that car hadn't been repaired, the Honda. So it's not like he brought it home and then fixed it up. Chris said something about that it was going to need something like $3,000 worth of repairs to be roadworthy. So there's a lie here. The question is, who's lying and why? But just briefly going back to this thing of him having his mail delivered to Jen's place. She claims that she trusts him, and yet she has all this evidence of him essentially lying to his parents. Why else would he have things delivered a full 3-hour drive away? Meaning that to collect those things, he had to do a 6-hour round trip. Meaning you've got the added expense of fuel. Just something is not adding up here at all. Number one, Jen couldn't possibly have trusted him so much when the evidence was right under her nose that he wasn't trustworthy. But number two, was that December visit, the Christmas visit, really the only time that he came and had an overnight stay? Because that's not the impression that I got from the other interviews. Is Jen saying that to try and minimise her own guilt? Essentially, oh, well, he's only been up and stayed overnight that one time, so it's not like I was giving him heaps of access to Maddie. I don't know. Something here doesn't add up.
And when he comes to visit after he's been kind of kicked out, is he paying rent, or how is this working, or is he just coming to visit?
He's just coming to visit.
Is your father making any arrangements to rent bedroom number 4? Because this is his income that he's losing.
Yeah, we had it. We had like an ad posted to see if we can get any renters. So we were trying to rent it out, but then we had to stop.
Now, I overlooked that in the past. He's asking her about that room. And basically, essentially the question was the room being kept open for Stefan and Juan, therefore losing rent on that room? And she's saying that, no, we had it advertised, but then we had to stop. Is she referring to after Maddie was deceased, they had to stop advertising it? Or they had to stop advertising it before that point in time? Because it seems illogical to be referring to after Maddie was gone, because, this whole line of questioning is in relation to essentially how was it that Stefan was still able to have that room, make use of that room when he came up? Why wasn't it being rented out? And of course the other side of that is that we know that everybody moved out of that townhouse after Maddie died. So Jen's involvement in that townhouse ended the day that Stefan was arrested, basically. Because then she went, even before, well, aside, I guess, from getting her things out of there, but essentially after Stefan was arrested, she went and stayed with her sister, and then who knows where else. So this is definitely talking about prior to Maddie's death. So my question is, why did they have to stop advertising that room? What was the reason for having to stop advertising that room? I'm drawing a blank here. I can't think of what a reason would have been. Unless by we had to stop advertising that room, she's using the royal we and actually just referring to herself. Maybe she was advertising that room to try and get a bit of money in her pocket, and maybe Juan was putting his foot down and saying, look, Maddie's just about to turn 13, she needs that room. I mean, we really don't know the honest to goodness truth in terms of one's involvement with Maddie having to sleep in that little fake room downstairs.
And what happens if you had ended up renting room number 4? Is Stefan going to still come up and visit you and sleep in your bed?
I don't know. I hadn't even thought of it at that point.
So, yes, those noises in the background. Mouse, the pup, has found one of my old fluffy slippers, which he is now essentially throwing around the room. I'm more than happy to allow him to have that, because at least then it will save the rest of my pairs of shoes from being destroyed. Now, let's go back to Jen. They basically asked her, what was your plan had room 4 been rented? Which is a fair enough question. And she responds by saying that she hadn't thought of that. I find that really curious. How could she have not thought about that? She claims that they were trying to find a way to have him move back up and move in. And, you know, she's having him come up for visits. She arranged to have him come up for Maddie's birthday, or to support her, or whatever her excuses are. Of course she would have thought of that. Unless the decision of who was going to move in came down to her, and she knew that basically she just had to say this person's not suitable to drag it out and keep that room free. So maybe that's why she didn't think about it. Because it just seems illogical to me. Of course you would think about it. You're having someone come and stay with you on regular occasions. This time round she's got herself a new job, and she's claiming that Stefan was coming to help her out. Well, was this going to be a one-off? What was the plan going to be after this trip if you actually managed to hold down this job? Because her story of him coming up to help her is essentially setting things up for an ongoing arrangement. I'm just going to have him come up and help me whenever I need him to take on the adulting role so I can go to bed and sleep and not worry about being a parent. And she's saying that she hadn't thought of what would happen if that room was rented out.
At one point you told investigators that Stefan was quote-unquote stuck down there until they could afford for him to come back. Were there plans for him to come back?
We had discussed him coming back and living with me. We weren't sure if temporarily or like for me to help him out with the place for a little bit before he can find his own place and move out. Or we were also considering talking about living together as like a companionship. Living with my best friend who's helping me out with my child.
So I think what she's done is she has actually gradually spiraled in on the actual reasoning that they were intending on using as a way to get Stefan back up there. So we have this account from Chris that he wasn't going to pay rent anymore for Stefan because Stefan was in a dead-end job. He was going nowhere fast with not a lot of money. To me, the fact that Jen's saying we all wanted to be together at Christmas time suggests that in actual fact there was never any point when Jen wanted Stefan to move back down to Northport. There was never any point when Stefan wanted to move back down to Northport. But for financial reasons, he was pressured to do so. One, wanted rent for that room because Stefan was no longer Jen's partner and had moved upstairs. Chris didn't want to pay $600 a month so that Stefan could sit on his ass in a job that was going nowhere and was not paying enough for Stefan to live off. So I actually believe that they were trying to orchestrate from day one a way of moving Stefan back up to the townhouse without him having to pay rent. So she gives this story at first. We discussed him coming back. We weren't sure. She just can't quite give a solid answer here. Temporarily for me to help him out with a place before he can find his own place and move out. But it takes her forever to get this out. Essentially, what is she saying here? She's saying the notion here is that now that Stefan no longer has a job, she wanted to bring him back rent-free because they knew that Chris was no longer going to pay rent for Stefan. And it sounds like one wanted rent for that room, understandably. It was probably a case of, well, if Maddie's not having that room, someone's got to be paying rent there. So I suspect Jen saying in terms of, well, we had the room, we were trying to fill the room, but we had to stop. I suspect Jen basically found some way to stop that, with the goal being to have Stefan move in. Because here's the crunch. After floating this idea of having him move back in so she can help him out until he gets back on his feet and gets a job and finds somewhere to live, which, sounds all very, very nice, very like, let's help our friend out. And then she presents with the other side of it, or living together as companionship, like, my best friend who's helping me out with my child. Right there, I think that is explaining a heck of a lot of things. When you break down everything in relation to Stefan moving out of the apartment, and then what Jen's saying about him moving back in, here's what I'm seeing as the subtext. Stefan moved out because Chris put his foot down and was no longer going to pay rent, and Juan still wanted rent money paid. I think we can agree that is definitely the case. We've heard that from Chris. We now have Jen talking about, well, we were trying to find a new roommate. So it seems like with Stefan gone, there was pressure to fill that room again, to bring the rent back in. Now, we've all gone over and over this whole notion of Stefan coming up for the week to help Maddie, to help Jen with Maddie and to help her with the dog. He was coming up for an extended visit because of her job, just to help her out, because otherwise she wasn't going to see enough of Maddie. You combine that with what she's saying here. She's expressed before about, oh, we wanted to bring him back because we missed him. Combine that with him coming and staying at Christmas time, meaning that obviously they weren't overly concerned about him being moved out because he came back almost straight away. He's been making regular trips apparently to visit them. And you have her now turning around and saying that he was stuck down at Northport essentially for financial reasons, because he didn't have a job, so he couldn't pay rent. The suggestion is made that she was going to help him get back on his feet and then he could move out and pay rent. And then she tags on the end, or he could have been living with me as my best friend, helping me out with my child. He didn't move back, or he didn't go up that weekend to help her out with Maddie and the dog. This was orchestrated between them as a way of moving him back into the apartment rent-free, by saying he's helping her out with Maddie so that she can still have Maddie at home with her. He's going to be her live-in nanny, essentially. That's what they were trying to set up. They were trying to bypass Chris and Juan and set it up for Stefan to move in permanently without having to pay rent. That's why we get this BS excuse of he was coming to help me with the dog and help with Maddie, and having him arrive just before her 2 days off. That was never the real intention. The real intention was to basically have an excuse for him to move back in rent-free. He's helping me out with Maddie, so it would be unfair to charge him rent, because this way I'm not going to lose my daughter, because I can't possibly work and see enough of my daughter if she's having to stay with my mother the entire time. This is why the notion of, one, helping Jen out with getting Maddie to school, etc., was never considered. This is why Stefan came up on the Sunday night, even though Jen wasn't working for 2 days. It was clearly just a convenient time to slide him back there into the townhouse with the excuse of he's just coming up for a week to help me out. And the intention probably was that that week was going to gradually extend. They wanted to have him back in there rent-free. Full stop, end of story. For some reason, Jen had to have Stefan around. And we know that Stefan had to be in that townhouse because he was obsessed with Maddie in the wrong way.
Because you told investigators that a lot of the reason your relationship fizzled off with Stefan was that your antidepressants. You had moved on to other people, had you not?
Yes.
And so despite having moved on with other people, you were still having Stefan come up and visit, and there were plans to cohabitate with him again, potentially.
Possibly, yes.
Now, I've always found this part of the conversation quite interesting. He brings up the fact that Jen basically was no longer interested in doing it because of her medications, and that's the reason why their relationship fizzled. And the question here is basically that she had moved on to other people since then. Not just moved on to someone else, but other people. So there's been more than one relationship that has occurred since Stefan's relationship with her fizzled because of her not wanting to do stuff. Which to me suggests that we know that Jen does swing both ways. So I'm going to speculate here that Jen had or was having same-sex relationships, and that perhaps Maddie sleeping in her bed was posing as an obstacle. If it is the truth that Maddie had reached a point where she couldn't sleep alone, which in a trauma situation is quite likely, could this be another reason for her having Stefan come back so that she could foist Maddie onto Stefan so that she could have someone else in her bed? Which then begs the question, that Sunday night where she's so vague about what occurred when she got home, the multiple versions of what occurred when she got home, eating her sub alone in her bedroom, talking about presents, counting money, talking about going to Macca's. All those things, none of it sounds real. None of it rings true. And I have speculated that Jen did not see Maddie on the Sunday night. Now we know that Jen did get home at around 10:30 on the Sunday night. We have the phone data to show that. But I'm just wondering if they geofenced and maybe there was an additional person in the townhouse that night. Maybe Jen had someone come and stay with her and that's why she needed Stefan there, so that she could send Maddie upstairs with Stefan. And maybe that's why she can't give a solid recollection of the Sunday night, because she didn't see Maddie. That's wild speculation, I know. But with Jen, anything is possible. There's got to have been motivation for Jen other than this claim of, I just need a good night's sleep, because that doesn't ring true given that she got up. If she'd have got up 15 minutes earlier, she would have been able to take Maddie to school and then make it to her appointment. The following day, she claims she got up at 8 o'clock. And that's after even less sleep, because we know that the police were there well after midnight. And the day after that, they didn't get into that hotel room until nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. And then Jen is recorded before 9 o'clock in the morning heading through the lobby to take the dog out for a walk. So should she have wished to, she would have been more than capable of getting up in time to take Maddie to school. So there's definitely a real reason for Stefan being there. And I definitely believe it had nothing to do with Jen needing him to take Maddie to school. I think at the very least, whatever it was, whatever the relationship that exists between them that they relied on each other for, whether it was for, as has been suggested, she was getting additional medication from Stefan. Whatever it was, it seems to me that this was the beginning of them orchestrating a way to get him back into the townhouse rent-free. But was there, if Jen is having these additional relationships, was there motivation there also of having Stefan around so that if Jen wanted to have someone over, she could send Maddie upstairs with Stefan? Just a thought. I mean, Will J has essentially pointed out the inconsistency here, clarifying with her that despite her having relationships with other people, she still had plans for Stefan to come up and visit and for him to come back and cohabit again. And she replies with possibly yes. In this instance, the use of possibly, I believe, is because she doesn't want to admit, heck yeah, that is definitely the plan. Possibly gives her a little bit of wriggle room. But I think that was definitely the plan. And now that I look at the entire situation, it does seem to me that that is the reason Stefan was there on the Sunday night. It wasn't about him helping her out through the week. It was about them finding an excuse to move him back without him having to pay rent. Whatever it was that those two needed from each other, clearly they needed it so desperately that they had to find a way around him being moved back down and around him being expected to pay rent. Because obviously Jen couldn't afford to pay his rent for him. He couldn't afford to pay his rent. Chris put his foot down. What other choice would they have? And yes, I will acknowledge the fact that given the amount of money that Stefan was putting into buying Tamagotchi and Warhammer figurines and stuff like that, he could have paid his own rent. But for him, that would not have been a priority. He would not have wanted to give up that money in order to pay rent.
Maddie had the opportunity to go visit her biological father in the fall out in Texas. Is that a yes?
Yes.
All right. Do you remember texting the biological father, hope nobody touches Maddie or tries shit or films her under the bathroom? You remember sending that text?
No.
Orange County Sheriff's Office back in February?
No.
Because that seems like a very oddly specific thing to text the father. So you didn't know anything about what was going on filming underneath bathroom doors?
No idea. I don't know why I would have texted that.
Okay. June 16th of last year, about 9:30 p.m.
Oh, actually, I can't actually think back to that.
Okay. What?
I think around the time that Maddie was going to fly out to Houston, there had been an airline person that had gone into the bathroom and placed their camera on the toilet to film. And I remember thinking, I don't want Maddie, I'm afraid of Maddie being alone on a plane, because what if an attendant does that to her? Says, hold on, let me fix something in the bathroom. And in reality, they're setting up a camera, because this did happen to a girl.
Okay.
So I want to say it may have been concerns over that.
Okay.
So Jen texts Tyler on 16th of June 2023 expressing concerns, saying that she hoped that no one touches Maddie or tries to film her under the bathroom. And rightly so, Will J says to her, well, that's oddly specific. And he actually questions her with regards to the incident of Stefan filming Angelica under the bathroom door in their townhouse. So she says, well, it's because there had been, or it may have been, concerns over an incident of someone filming a child in a bathroom on an airplane. Well, when I heard this, my first response was, BS, it is very, very oddly specific. But I thought about it and thought, actually, I do recall hearing about that case. And I know in a previous video I said, look, here's the thing. There actually was a case where a child was filmed under a bath or in a airplane bathroom. The child was redirected to a different bathroom because they were told it wasn't working. So here's the problem. Let's read this portion of this article and you'll be able to see what's wrong with it straight away. So this is a former American Airlines flight attendant has pleaded guilty to secretly recording video of a 14-year-old girl using an airplane bathroom and having recordings of 4 other girls using the lavatories. Goes on to, he pleaded guilty, blah, blah. Third paragraph. According to investigators, the girl got up to use the main cabin lavatory nearest to her seat during a September 2nd, 2023 flight from Charlotte to Boston, but found it was occupied. Thompson told her the first-class lavatory was unoccupied and escorted her there. She told investigators that before she entered the bathroom, Thompson told her he needed to wash his hands and that the toilet seat was broken. After he left, the teen entered the bathroom and saw red stickers on the underside of the toilet seat lid, which was in the open position, and then basically she discovered the camera. Did you spot the problem with this? This occurred on the 2nd of September 2023. This occurred 3 months after Maddie travelled to see Tyler. So Jen is not only psychic, she's a medium. You heard her channeling Stefan in yesterday's video. But she's also clairvoyant. She can predict the future. Because she saw this happening. And it concerned her so much that she had to express her concerns to Tyler. I call BS on that. Now, there is another recorded incident, which I'll just flash up just quickly. This involves the same individual recording a child in January of 2023. But, looking at paragraph 2 again, FBI agents knocked on the 9-year-old's family's home almost a year after the alleged incident in January 2023. In other words, they only found out in December or January of 24, December of 23 or January of 2024. So Jen's lying. Neither of these incidents occurred prior to Maddie's trip to visit Tyler. I mean, the 9-year-old incident was one of 3 others they discovered after they had arrested the guy and seen what was on his phone. So basically, Jen has expressed concerns to Tyler over someone possibly filming Maddie under the bathroom door. And she's saying to detectives, oh, that's because of this thing that happened. Although she's trying not to be too specific. But in her head, she's gone, well, this is a good excuse. It may have been concerns over that incident. Definitely not being affirmative there, is she? She's not saying it's definitely because this occurred. She's just saying it may have been. She's probably sitting there after she said that and thought, damn, I'm good. I came up with that so damn quick. I just saved my neck. Because luckily there was that thing that occurred. I wonder if she actually checked dates afterwards and realised that she screwed up. Hopefully Will J checked dates afterwards and realised that she screwed up and she had lied. So again, we have a derivative use interview where Jen has lied. This is now solid evidence that they can actually use against her when, touch wood, they choose to press charges. It's another little thing to add to the Woody Allen comments and all the other things that point towards Jen knowing. I mean, these statements that have been made by Jen, yes, they are circumstantial evidence. Here's the thing with circumstantial evidence, and I can't remember who explained it this way, otherwise I would give them credit, but it probably was someone like Duty Ron or Bill Cannon or Chris McDonough. Basically, you can view circumstantial evidence as a pile of pencils. You have a bunch of pencils lying on your desk. You can pick one pencil up and you could probably snap that in half fairly easily. But if you tape together 3 pencils, it's going to be a heck of a lot harder, pretty much impossible for you to snap them because suddenly they're stronger. And the more pencils you add to that pile, the more pencils you tape together or tie together, the harder they are going to be to break. So this alone wouldn't be overly strong circumstantial evidence. But then you have all these other instances added in. The Woody Allen comment, the account from the Disney girlfriend about Stefan coming out of the shower unclothed and Jen considering that completely fine. You have the descriptions of inappropriate behaviour from Deb Stearns, even though she tries to brush it off as showing affection. No, when a child sits on the arm of a lounge, puts their arm around a adult male and says, I love you, that's not appropriate. When a child talks about waking up in bed with her leg wrapped around an adult male, That's not appropriate. These are things that Jen was aware of. Deb Stearns said to Jen, "It is not appropriate for Maddie to be in a bed with Stefan." They've got so much circumstantial evidence from the various interviews they've done that combined, they could build a case against Jen. And this bathroom story, like I said, on its own, not a great deal. But when you add that in, especially alongside the presence of images that have been recorded of a flatmate under the bathroom door, that screams guilty knowledge.
Now, June 16th of last year at 9:30 p.m. and 27 seconds, you texted Stefan this: "Maddie's no longer sleeping with me. I can't risk it." What does that mean?
I have no idea.
Okay, as you probably realise, I've listened to this interview multiple times. I've used clips from this interview multiple times. But this is actually the first time that I've gone through it from start to finish and really thoroughly analysed what was being said. And right now I'm having a major light bulb moment. How much debating has there been over this text from Jen, to Stefan saying, "Maddie is no longer sleeping with me, I can't risk it." It was confusing, especially because, of course, her response when asked this question is a really, really long silence. And then, once again, really quietly, meaning she was lying, she knew precisely why, she answers, "I have no idea." There was a significant reason for her making a decision on the 16th of June 2023 that Maddie could no longer sleep with her because she didn't want to risk it. Now, let's just have a look at what else was happening around this time. That message was sent to Stefan 16th of June, 9:30 and 27 seconds. The message to Tyler, "I hope nobody films Maddie under the bathroom doors," was sent at 9:30. 27 seconds before the "Maddie's no longer sleeping with me, I can't risk it." Well, we know that they're not sleeping in the bathroom, so she's not talking about the risk of someone filming Maddie sleeping with Jen, because that's just totally ridiculous. But before we go think about what's going on here, what else happened in June of 2023? That's right. Jen made Stefan move upstairs in June of 2023. Is there a connection between the text to Tyler, "I'm worried about people filming Maddie under doors," the text to Stefan, "Maddie's no longer sleeping with me, I can't risk it," and Stefan moving upstairs. Because it seems like they all happened around the same time. Here's the next question. Does any of this connect to the day that Maddie went missing? One of the flatmates saw Stefan, or heard Stefan, using power tools. She couldn't identify what it was Stefan was using, but she knew she could hear him using a power tool. And of course, based on the whole filming under the bathroom thing, people have speculated that maybe Stefan was uninstalling some cameras that he had installed. Well, when we look at this as a whole, we also know that there is allegedly a history of Stefan sneaking around to his friend's place and filming his friend's mother when she was in the bathroom. We also know that allegedly Stefan filmed his flatmate's girlfriend secretly. And each time he got away with that, of course. Is it possible that Stefan is the kind of person who likes to just film that kind of thing all the time? Because he was having a relationship with Jen up until December of 2022. It seems quite possible that he had some sort of setup in their bedroom which enabled him to film his activities with Jen. This is a guy who is seriously addicted to this kind of stuff. The fact that he was filming Angelica shows that while his preference probably may be young girls, he wasn't blind when it came to adult females. So Jen saying, Maddie's no longer sleeping with me, I can't risk it. Has this got something to do with maybe there was a setup in her bedroom? Because don't forget, even though supposedly her and Stefan weren't doing anything, Stefan was still sharing a bed up until that point with Jen and Maddie. Did Jen suddenly discover that Stefan was filming things happening in her room? And she didn't want to risk her, Jen, being caught on camera? Is that why Stefan was sent to sleep upstairs? Because it really seems odd that they would have been broken up for 6 months before she finally puts her foot down and says, you got to go sleep upstairs. This claim that it took 6 months for Maddie to figure it out and that they just pretended to still be in a relationship for 6 months, it doesn't ring true. Maddie would have known. She's not silly. I mean, you know, for the most part, those sort of activities aren't silent. So Maddie would have been aware before Stefan and Jen stopped amusing each other. Maddie would have been aware that that was going on all the times that she was in the bed with them. So she would have been aware also that those things had ceased. Sadly, Maddie had a greater understanding of those sorts of proclivities, thanks to that scumbag Stearns. So of course she knew that the relationship was over between Jen and Stefan back in December of 22. And they're fooling themselves if they thought that she didn't know. So is the truth of the matter that basically Jen didn't want to be caught on camera with Stefan doing things in her room, and the ultimatum became, you're going upstairs, Maddie's no longer sleeping with me, I can't risk it, so you have to move upstairs. Problem solved. Because we know that Maddie didn't stop sleeping with Jen, so whatever the problem actually was solved, wasn't it? If you say, I can't risk it, that's a pretty serious way of saying, this can't happen anymore. I don't want to take the risk. If you say, I can't risk it, that means you're pretty serious. That means the issue is pretty serious. At the moment, because Mouse is such a damn fast little pup, and because he's so tiny, anytime the front door's open at my place, before that door is opened, I pick him up. Because I can't risk having him fly out the front door and have someone not notice. I live on a pretty busy road. It's terrifying to think of. So when I say I pick him up because I can't risk him getting out the front door, it's me expressing the fact that it is damn serious and that there's no way my opinion on that is going to change. And yet Jen has said, Maddie's no longer sleeping with me, I can't risk it. And yet the sleeping situation did not change. The only change that occurred around June of that time was Stefan moving upstairs. And Maddie was still continuing to sleep with Jen. So what was the risk? So the risk wasn't about Maddie specifically sleeping with Jen, because it continued. The only thing that changed was Stefan not sharing a bed with them. Stefan moving upstairs, which suggests that the risk involved Maddie being in the same bed as Stefan. Now, you could argue that perhaps the timing of that was that Maddie had started getting her period. Although we did hear from Deb Stearns that she'd actually got her period quite early. And the other side of that is, if Jen was so concerned about Maddie sharing a bed with Stearns, once she had started getting her period, why did she still allow it to happen? So the risk could not possibly be the risk of Maddie still sleeping with Stearns after she got her period. So to me it points to the question of, was Jen maybe suddenly aware of Stefan filming things in her room? Maybe she demanded that he permanently delete anything that had her in it. Maybe that's why she was so confident when Detective O'Malley asked her, are we likely to find anything, any images or videos with you in it? And she was so confident, like, no. Because maybe in June of 2023, she had made sure that Stefan got rid of all that and made him move upstairs. Maybe he did have some sort of filming set up, a permanent filming set up in that upstairs bedroom. This is all speculation, of course, but when you start to look at everything in terms of the timeline, it's really suspicious that you have Jen texting Tyler, worrying about someone filming Maddie under doors, and then 30 seconds later messaging Stefan and saying, Maddie's no longer sleeping with me, I can't risk it. And you have Jen telling us that in June of that year, which ties in with these, Stefan moved upstairs. And we know Maddie still continued to sleep with Jen in Jen's bed, so the risk apparently no longer existed. Like I said, we know the risk wasn't about Maddie actually sharing a bed with Stefan, because Jen was still happy for that to happen, just not with her around.
How often was Maddie sleeping with you?
Often, all the time.
Well, you keep on saying often versus all the time. Was it 100% of the time or not 100% of the time?
If she wasn't with my mom and she was with me, then yeah, she was sleeping with me.
Okay. And if she's at mom, she's 100% of the time sleeping with mom?
With
Your mom?
With my mom, or she does have her own room, I guess. Like there's another spare room she could use, but for the most part, she prefers to sleep with my mom.
Okay.
So what you will have realised is that after him asking Jen about this text, Maddie's no longer sleeping with me, I can't risk it, and Jen says, I have no idea as to, what she was talking about, he doesn't dig into that situation at all. Just leaves that there. That's been said. Let's walk away from it. We don't want to go there. Again, the things that are not being asked in this interview is one of the reasons that I feel confident that they are building a case against Jen. There's a lot of questions that could have been asked in relation to that, especially following the conversation about the text to Tyler about filming under doors, especially given that those text messages were essentially back to back. But he doesn't touch that at all. Files that away, moves on. He wants to know, when Maddie is sleeping with Jen, how often does that occur? And again, we get Jen, who is incapable of giving a straight answer. She says often, and then all the time. And Will Jay's getting really annoyed with her at this point in time. You can hear it in the tone of his voice. He's had enough of her BS. He knows that she's been messing him around in this interview. He probably knows full well she's been lying to him. And he knows she's been extremely evasive in her answers. It must have been a super frustrating interview for him. And he says to her, "You keep saying often versus all the time. Which is it? Was it 100% of the time?" And she's like, "Yes. If she wasn't staying at my mother's place, then yes, she was sleeping with me." Finally gives an answer. Except that's not entirely truthful, is it? Because we know that if Stefan was there, she was sending Maddie to sleep with Stefan. We have one instance where she lets slip that basically she was sending Maddie upstairs to sleep with Stefan on a school night, something about alarms, not wanting to wake Stefan with her alarm or something. And then we get the discussion of sleeping arrangements at Yolanda's. And this is interesting for me. She says, she's asked about, does she sleep with Yolanda or does she have her own room? And Jen says, basically, she's saying, well, yeah, she sleeps with Yolanda, but I guess there's another spare room she could use, but for the most part she prefers to sleep with my mum. Again, how about a straight answer, Jen? Has she ever used that spare room? Because the way you're saying it makes it sound like she may not have ever used that spare room. I guess there's another spare room she could use, meaning, well, I guess the option's there and she could use that option. By using I guess and she could, to me that's indicating that actually this has never occurred. So when she says, for the most part, she prefers to sleep with my mum, I think the truth there is that she probably always slept with Yolanda. This is a child who's been so messed up, who's been so traumatised, that she needed to sleep with her grandmother to feel safe. For that, Jen deserves no forgiveness ever. The damage that was already done to this poor child is just horrendous. She was already facing what appeared to be insurmountable challenges for her. That is so heartbreaking.
Now, my understanding is that you had some sort of period tracker that you kept track of Madeline's period with?
I had a calendar app that I would write what days she would get her period, yeah.
And obviously, Madeline doesn't have a job, so she's not going out and buying the products that she would need if she had her period, right? You would have to do that for her? Mm-hmm. Is that a yes?
Yes.
So, do you remember her using any of those products at all in February? Because I assume you take the trash out, or does she take the trash out, or how does all this work?
I take the trash out. In February, no, I didn't notice her using any of her feminine hygiene products.
Did you have any conversations with her about that?
No, but I didn't notice until after everything.
Because it would have been due at the beginning of February, and this all happens at the end of February, so she's almost due again in March. So you never had any conversations with her about not having her period at the beginning of February?
No, she's had other periods that have been missed or super late, so I just assumed this was going to be one of those situations again.
Okay.
But no, I didn't.
Now, I know this is a topic that is extremely triggering for some people. I know there's some people who take the viewpoint that we shouldn't even be discussing this. I know there's one creator who keeps coming up with new people that have contacted her to tell her that Maddie wasn't pregnant and that they know this for a fact. Well, I can tell you now that that information, if Maddie was pregnant, will have been kept tightly under wraps. And we won't know the answer until this goes to court. So saying that a friend of the family contacted you and they said, no, we know for certain, we've been told for certain, I call BS on that. And there's various versions of that we've heard. But let's talk about what's being said here. So he's asked her about tracking Maddie's cycle. As she says that she has a calendar app and she would write Maddie's period in. And he doesn't go any further with that, but then he asks her about buying products for Maddie. He points out, well, Maddie's not working. Presumably you bought the products for her. Did she use any products in February? Jen says no. But she says she didn't actually realise that till after everything had happened. And we get the conversation, well, Maddie was actually due at the beginning of February. And he asks her, did you ever have a conversation with her about not having a period at the beginning of February? And Jen says here that no, she's had other periods that have been missed or super late, so I just assumed this was going to be one of those situations again. Okay, let's go back to this. You have to have a good memory if you want to be a good liar. You don't need a good memory if you're telling the truth. Jen, on one hand, is saying she hadn't even noticed until after the fact that that Maddie hadn't had her period. And now she's saying that, well, she just assumed that Maddie not having her period was just going to be one of those situations again. So she's putting herself back in time to around that time when Maddie didn't get her period, before Maddie was deceased. Well, did you notice or did you not notice? Because if you didn't notice, then you wouldn't have thought, oh, it's just going to be one of those situations again. And she's actually in other interviews mentioned, I think from memory, possibilities of Maddie not being late, but she's never said anything about Maddie missing her period. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty certain that that is the situation. She also, in, I think, the final interview, said that she had been, after being questioned about Maddie's period, she had been contemplating whether or not Maddie may have been pregnant. Well, if you were contemplating whether or not Maddie may have been pregnant, that means you weren't dismissing the missed period as this is just going to be one of those situations again. So she gives this really long, again, explanation and then says very quietly, but no, I didn't. I didn't ask her about her missed period. I think, based on what she's saying here, that Jen was aware that Maddie had missed her period. I think that, based on the way she's speaking here, that throwing this extra bit in here about her having missed or being super late is basically just an extension on her. Well, when I was young, I used to be late as well, which was, I think, in the final interview that she said. She's never, until this point, introduced the possibility of Maddie having missed a period before, which you would think, if you are in an interview and being questioned, would be your immediate response. Detectives are saying, oh, well, Maddie didn't have her period in February. Your immediate response would be, she's missed before. But Jen didn't have that response until now. So I'm not buying this soggy bread. I think Jen was well and truly aware the pregnancy kits in the bathroom could be something that's been lying around in that bathroom forever. Because Jen doesn't strike me as the sort of person that's going to clean out her cupboards and throw things away. Or they could also be something that's kept there just in case. The fact that this is being asked during this derivative immunity interview says to me that it is extremely significant that Maddie did not have her period at the beginning of February. There is something important about this. If it was just a case of a child missing her period or being late, it would be irrelevant. It wouldn't have any bearing on the case. It wouldn't have any bearing on charges against Stearns. At the end of the day, the whole point of this interview was this was being done prior to the going to the grand jury to get that indictment. They are asking her information that will help to get a grand jury indictment for Stearns for unaliving Maddie. Maddie missing her period is going to be of absolutely no interest to a grand jury whatsoever. It's going to be of no interest to Will J whatsoever. If Maddie was pregnant, that's a whole other kettle of fish. Then the question becomes, did Jen know? Did Stefan know? So that's why I think this is really significant.
Did you ever discuss her periods or lack of periods with Stefan?
I don't think so.
Again, the answer doesn't match the narrative. Did you ever discuss Maddie's lack of periods with Stefan? And again, we get somewhat quieter than what she said before. And she says, I don't think so. Well, that's neither here nor there, is it? You don't think so. You can't say you definitely didn't discuss it with Stefan. You can't say you definitely did. But here's the thing. She only just said before that she actually hadn't noticed that Maddie had missed her period. until after everything happened. Well, after everything happened, Stefan was locked up and Jen wasn't talking to him anymore. There's actually an order on Stefan which prevents him from talking to Jen. So we know there's been no conversation between him and Jen since he was arrested. And yet she claims that she hadn't actually realised about Maddie missing her period until after everything went down. Which means when asked, did you discuss it with Stefan? Logically the answer would have been no, because I hadn't thought about it, I hadn't realised it. But instead, she says, I don't think so. So I'm not going to say yes or no. I'm not going to give you a direct answer here. Generally, when Jen says, I don't think so, based on her past history, I think the answer is yes. She's not wanting to give a direct answer here. Saying no wouldn't be a problem. You wouldn't worry about avoiding saying that. So her saying, I don't think so, says to me there was, at some point in time, a conversation between Stefan and Jen about Maddie missing her period. Let that sink in for a minute. If there was a conversation between Maddie and Stefan about Maddie missing her period, that means Jen knew full well what was going on under her roof. Because otherwise, why have that conversation? Why would it be something of concern that you would discuss it with the male in the house? And generally, it's just not what you do. Now, I was going to push on and try and get to the end of this, but I realise we are getting to the pointy end of things. This is when the questions start to get more interesting. And of course, if you remember from listening to this, we reach a point at the end where Jen's lawyer basically steps in and says, interview over. So I really want to give all that the attention it deserves, meaning I want to allow myself plenty of time to really look at what's being said in the last part of the interview. So I'm going to finish here with this one and then come back to this tomorrow in part 5, it must be. So on that note, as I mentioned at the start of this video, best support you can give my channel is by subscribing. So if you are not already subscribed, please do. And also, please hit the like button, that also helps my channel, makes a huge difference. And please leave a comment below. I look forward to reading everyone's comments. I know I don't always manage to respond to everyone's comments at the moment, but I do read them. I do my best to get through as many as possible. I have mentioned previously, at this point in time, I make a point of starting by responding to comments by my members, just because of the volume, the sheer volume of comments. Got to start somewhere, and might as well give my members that at the very least. And this is not about me holding a carrot over people's heads to say, become a member. This is me saying that at this point in time, my channel has reached a point where I do get a heck of a lot of comments, And time-wise, as hard as I try, I don't get through all of them. So this is where I do have to prioritise, meaning this is where I have to prioritise and give members the first bit of attention from me. Okay, so on that note, thank you for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.